Happy New Year's, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. Today we'll be painting another intercessor from the Imperial Fists, but a successor chapter. However, I did just really want to wish everyone a very heartfelt Happy New Year's, and I do sincerely hope that everyone had a Happy New Year's. But yeah, let's get into it. Last time we were here, we painted Brother Litus Garradon from the Imperial Fists. He was really fun. Gave him some nice muddy boots and stuff. So I figured, you know what, maybe I should make this a series because I kind of love all of the Imperial Fists, and it turns out that they have a lot of successor chapters. So I decided, yeah, let's do another Imperial Fist successor today. And specifically, due to how cool this Marine's pose is, you can really see his fist. We'll be painting the Crimson Fists. Okay, now, truthfully, I don't really know too much about the Crimson Fists, which is a shame because they do seem really cool. Based on what I've seen written on lore threads on Reddit, it seems like the Crimson Fists really exemplify protecting civilians more so than a lot of other chapters or Space Marine legions. And yeah, let's get right into it. Before I decided to do a series where I paint all of the successor chapters of the Imperial Fists, honestly, I just took all of the Space Marines that I currently own and I gave them a white primer because my initial idea was to only paint the Imperial Fists themselves. As such, none of these minis now have a Zenithal highlight, so I guess I did a reverse Zenithal with black first. I'm not sure, there might be a term for this, but I'm not sure. After he got his reverse Zenithal, I sprayed him with my darkest blue, this being Vallejo Prussian blue. It's a pretty cool color. As we can all see, it is dark. It's a very dark blue. I was also super stoked to see that the shadows that I had painted on in black really made the shadows pop on the mini. I was worried that it wouldn't work very well, but it really did, I think. Now that we had our darkest blue down, it was just time to work up to the lighter tones of blue. This time using flat blue from Vallejo with essentially just one thin coat and just hitting as many raised sections as possible. I then lined up the flat blue from the second tone to our lightest tone using sky blue, another Vallejo color. This is the lightest blue that I own, so it really did work as the perfect highlight. Really made all of those shadows pop, as we can see. And yeah, this was our final product after the airbrushing. Before I really dove into the painting though, I wanted to give the mini a once over to make sure that he had good coverage, and to also look at these little details again because I don't really know what they are. I don't know enough about Space Marine lore to know why he would have a key strapped to his waist that has a skull on it and seems to be in a reliquary of some sort. Don't know if I said reliquary correctly. I'm not a lich, I'm sorry. Our next step after airbrushing was to get a base coat down on all of his additional details, this being his beautiful Crimson Fists, their cool Aquila in the center of their chest, and of course his mighty bolt gun. As we get these base coats on him, I did want to talk a bit about the Crimson Fists, and well, at least what I do know and what I have read about. Like I said earlier, from the very small amount of reading I've been able to do on them, it does seem like they do go out of their way to protect civilian populations, which is pretty cool. Kind of makes them like Chad Marines. Also, on their Lexicanum page, it says that their specialty is fighting orcs. And that is it, hard stop, just anti-orc warfare. And I wonder if that is because the Crimson Fists were the poster boys, kind of, in 2nd edition Warhammer 40k, where they actually had the honor of being the chapter that was on the cover of the Space Marine Codex. And I wonder if this is due to the big bad enemies at that time were the orcs. I was pretty young, so I don't really remember, but I feel like Games Workshop were pushing the orcs as the big bads. But maybe I'm wrong, I don't remember. Anyways, back to the actual painting. As we can see, my first highlighted details were added back onto his chest. The chest itself, I did decide to just use grays and kind of line it up with gray highlights, just using pure white from Vallejo. And this was because I couldn't really tell. Based on art, it looks like their chest is gray, but I have seen sources when I was looking for references that say that the chest piece, the equivalent on their chest, is actually silver instead of gray. But I wasn't really a fan of just having his chest be silver paint and then nothing else on him being painted with metallic paints. So I did feel like just touching the highlights with grays instead of silvers was better in this case. It's also really, really good practice to try and not paint over my darker grays as I worked up and added more and more white to our initial gray. It was a super fun time and definitely didn't give me a headache from squinting at all. Next up, I essentially did the same thing with his fists, except because I had started the fists using a base coat with a Reaper paint, I decided everything on his fists, I should say, sorry, would be painted with Reaper. I know nothing really about color theory. However, I have seen from watching tutorials that the best way to make red tones lighter is to actually use red itself. So for example, if you start with a very deep red and you want to go to a lighter red instead of adding white, like you might want to do, it's best to find a lighter red, like a flat red, and add that to the darker one to get your mid-tone. And so yeah, that was exactly what I did. And I do think it looks really good. Red itself is pretty translucent. So when you're adding highlights, the older colors that you painted before do bleed through. It's kind of fun to highlight red. It looks really cool. That's probably why whenever I see a cape that I'm going to have to paint, my first inclination is to just do red, because red pops and making it highlighted is just so fun. The next step was to paint up all the cute little knicky-knacks that he has attached to his belt. Space Marines basically have a Batman level of knicky-knacks on their belts, which is fun. Actually, I'm still at a complete loss as to what this could be a key to. My assumption at this point, though, is it's just a key to their battle barge, and without that key, they won't be able to open the ship and, you know, fly to other sectors and kill Xenos. So I just ended up kind of winging it, and as we can see, I just kind of assumed that it was a metal thing of some sort, which, I mean, I guess it is because it's a key. So I just painted the little skull white, like a skull, and then the key was yellow, kind of like a brass, because I lack imagination and brass is just a cool color for a key. Next up, it was time to paint all of the details on his bolter. In this case, though, because he's a Primaris Space Marine, I guess it would be a call pattern bolt rifle. I think that makes sense. And perhaps because the Crimson Fists are a successor chapter of the Imperial Fists, it might make sense that they have the Imperial Fist Stalker bolt rifles. Does that make sense? Can anyone confirm that for me, please? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Someone please help. However, like we can see, I did really just stick with a very, very basic color scheme for the bolt rifle, and gave the Holy Aquila on it also a crimson color scheme because it just matches and makes sense, I suppose. I really, really, really like bolt rifles. I think that they have a simple kind of beautiful elegance to them. I mean, I definitely would not want to be on the receiving end of one, but they are beautiful and elegant. You gotta admit that. And of course, because he is a pure Space Marine, he must also get a purity seal to seal in his purity, and so that he can show it off to his family members how pure he is. Only difference on the red for the purity seal was that I essentially used vermilion as the highest highlight because I just thought it looked cool, and I wanted it to be a different red than every other thing that was painted red on the mini. You know what? Because this bolt gun is on a chain and it's attached to him, I think it's a good luck charm. You know what? I bet he probably went to the pleasure world of Akihabara and he put his Imperial currency into a gacha machine and he spun it, and this is what came out. But because he's a Space Marine and he's all about, you know, maximum efficiency, he didn't have a cell phone on him because he doesn't have time for that, so he just strapped it to himself. Now he takes his gacha prize into battle. And I forgot that I painted the skull on the bolt gun thing, doodle gacha thing, red. The parchment on the purity seal itself, we just got some brown and some highlights, and then I did my best to replicate little doodles on it because I do not have the skill to actually put words on those yet. And then his grundle and the rest of his joints just got black gray, and all of the little bits and bobs on his back were just painted very, very simply with earth and brown, and then highlighted using essentially just lighter browns to go up. This was the classic part in the paint job where I really didn't know how much detail I should give all of his little pouches, because I don't really feel like your eyes are drawn to the back of a mini usually. You want to see what he's holding and what he's doing at the front, right? Like this mini is in kind of a dramatic pose. So I never know how much detail to really contribute to those. For his helmet though, I thought it would be really cool to make him look like a veteran and paint the faceplate white. And then it was on to the hardest part, and that is of course the face. Due to me being a big noob and gluing on the head when I first built the mini, his head got painted blue, and that was very lucky in this particular model, I think. Because the Caucasian flesh tones tend to be super translucent, like a white paint, the blue tones would always bleed through, and it looked like natural shadow. So I was super lucky that happened. His eyes, though, of course, because I'm terrible, could really use some work, and we're not going to focus on those for long. Because next up, it was time to put on the decal. I have taken a lot of your guys' advice on how to put decals on because I always fuck them up, and I'm still doing it so wrong. Hopefully I'll get better though. Next up was one of my personal favorite things to do, which is to make a scenic base. Not really a scenic base in this case, it was essentially just gluing little rocks down, but it's so fun. I don't know why, it's just so fun to glue down little rocks and paint them different colors with some fake foliage. It's a good time. It's a time when you forget the eyes that you had just painted and the decal that you messed up from earlier. Lastly, I gave the edges a nice black paint, and then just some very light blue highlights to the rest of the mini to make it kind of pop in certain areas, and called it done. And here is an almost painted glory, our anonymous sergeant of the Crimson Fists chapter. I say anonymous because we haven't named him yet. Last time I named Lytus Garadon using the Killzone Imperial Fist naming chart from the book. However, the Crimson Fists don't seem to have the same table in the book. And I don't think that Crimson Fists are named the same as Imperial Fists due to them being from an entirely different world, and their chapter master is called Pedro Cantor, which is kind of Latin, like Spanish. As such, I decided that for this Marine, we will try something different. Hello everyone, and welcome to our wheel naming generator. First up, we have these names for the first name. Alright, I will go ahead and spin now. Alright, and it looks like the first name we have is Pedro. Alright, next up, it's time to spin for the last name. Here we go. And may I introduce to the crowd of adoring fans, brother Pedro Garcia of the Crimson Fists. All in all, this was actually a pretty fun build. I was super happy with how the pre-shading went in the airbrushing, and the purity seal was also really cool. Painting with blue is always fun, I think. Painting with blue and red, I should say, is always fun. So I hope that you all enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next one for our new series where we paint a successor chapter. I do also want to tease that I do know which chapter I'm going to paint next, because I really want to paint a Reaver, and I know that there is an Imperial Fist chapter. They're not very common, but they deal in urban warfare, and I already have the mini selected, so I do hope to see you guys on the next one when I terribly paint another Space Marine Intercessor.